Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined with Cameron Abrams. He's a reporter for the Texan and a doctoral candidate with a focus on postmodern philosophical influences in education. Cameron, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to talk Texas Leg elections. It was a big week last week, a lot to debrief.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Before we jump into all of that, I gave maybe the briefest possible introduction I could. If you want to give people a little bit more background, what your focus is on at the Texan. And I think we'll talk a little bit about your doctoral focus maybe later on in the show. But yeah, just give a little bit more background.
Yeah, so I started here at the Texan just a little over a year and a half ago. Before that was living in Sacramento, California. And I spent some time as a staffer in the California State Assembly. I was working in the higher education system at University of the Pacific and wanted to make a transition. And I was really interested in putting different ideas out there, exploring a variety of different topics, and found myself on my way to Austin, Texas to work at the Texan. And, being here, covering a variety of different beats. I came here to cover education and cultural issues that pop up. But with being such a lean team that we have here, you jump around to a lot of different things. So I have written about the education issue a lot here in the state, but also written about immigration and border security and technology. So just covering a lot of stuff here, but it's very interesting. It's really energizing to see what is being done here in Texas. It's really fun.
Yeah. So I didn't know that you were a staffer for, I don't know who it was, but a staffer for some elected representative in the California Assembly. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, they have an assembly and a Senate.
Okay, so that's why they're so messed up over there, I guess. So let's talk. I want to ask you. I'm glad you brought up you write about cultural issues and stuff like that, and I'll certainly ask you about how those come into play with Texas politics and how that might change the culture wars and everything how that might change the shape of the 89th legislature. But let's talk about the elections this past week. I know that there were obviously some incumbents won. There's people like Shelley Luther, she won her seat there, I guess, in the Dallas area. Is that correct? She was the lady that famously refused to keep her salon closed during COVID.
Right.
There was a lot of people. Mihaela Plessa, former guest of the show, she won her re-election. A lot of people, elections, re-elections, stuff like that. Were there any big winners or losers?
Yeah, so the House got two. They saw a net gain of 2 Republican members.
Okay.
Which is going to be interesting moving forward for the 89th session because it gives them a little more wiggle room with trying to pass some more interesting legislation that could come up. But I'm glad you brought up the Mihaela Plessa race because that was a race I was keeping my eye on because Steve Kennard was a very interesting candidate for the Republicans, especially with his focus on his involvement with like Bitcoin and really like a decentralized mission that he was sort of promoting. But people didn't really think that was going to be a flip. There wasn't a lot of focus on it. Abbott came in at the end and put some money into the race, but it was a little bit too late. That was interesting. And then also HD 74, Eddie Morales. There was a lot of money thrown into that race. Eddie Morales hung on to his seat, beating out Robert Garza. So that was another interesting race that I think a lot of people were watching closely. And, Eddie Morales, he's kind of signaled he's going to work with both sides of the aisle since he's been reelected, put out a big press release about that. So those are really the 2 big races I was keeping my eye on. A lot of Abbott endorsed candidates won. Yeah. And so it seems like Abbott's involvement in this race really paid off in the races across the state.
Why do you think that is? Why? I mean, other than being the governor, right? But there's, if I'm not mistaken, it was sort of, his endorsements versus maybe Ken Paxton's endorsements, and sort of there was that inter-party fighting that maybe wasn't, totally front and center. But if you were paying attention to Texas legislature, the Texas Ledge at all, it was there, and you sort of knew about it. Why do you think that that Governor Abbott's choices won out at the end?
Well, it's two things, right? It's the money that Abbott was providing to a lot of these races, really helps build up the profile through advertisements and just building out a campaign. The money is super important. But then also the focus on the issues. Abbott has really tried to push school choice across the finish line, especially last session. Wasn't able to do it, really wants to do it during the 89th session. And so school choice seems to be the main focus for Abbott, at least. And it seems like it's resonating with the voters as well. And I think just signaling that to people is, garnering a lot of support.
Yeah. Didn't a lot of Republicans that were opposed to school choice lose their seat because of the people say it's because of school choice, but they lost their primary races to, I guess, more school choice friendly Republicans? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah. So I've been actually working on a piece about this for this week because, prior to the March 5th primary,
Yeah.
Abbott came out and endorsed 58 members who voted against that Rainey amendment that stripped the education savings account accounts from the omnibus bill that was proposed during the special session. And what we saw at the end of the day after election night is there's going to be 26 pro-school choice Republicans who are going to be entering into the Texas Ledge. So, Abbott came out afterwards, after the election, saying, he has enough votes to pass it. My estimation, at least, there's going to be 80 pro-school choice friendly members.
Okay.
So, that's to say if everyone who voted against the Rainey Amendment and all these pro-school choice members coming into the House vote accordingly. When the vote comes up on the floor, we don't know what the legislation is going to look like yet, of course, but it's really, it bodes well for Abbott wanting to pass this next session.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he obviously called so many special sessions last time to try to get something passed, and that failed. And that's been the major news story since then about what's going to happen in the 89th. I mean, do you think that, school choice can mean a lot of different things? It can just mean, they pushed that it would just be kids in failing schools and sort of special needs kids. And of course, there's universal school choice where everyone gets to pick the school that they go to with the state would send you a check. I don't think it's going to get that far, but with the 80, that's the number you said, right? 80 friendly votes that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a lot, right? Do you think that where is it going to fall, do you think? What do you think that legislation will look like?
Well, it's interesting because if we, like you mentioned, take a look back at what the different proposals look like. There was different tiers and bracketing for the eligibility and for the groups that would be first served through the education savings program that was being proposed. I think we're going to see something very similar to that, because if we look around at different states that have instituted school choice programs, a lot of them that have been successful have used this tiered program and sort of slowly expanding the program to a larger pool of students and children. So I think that's something we're going to see something similar to that. I know with the House having this net gain in pro-school choice members, also the Senate having a gain of a Republican member, we'll probably see a variety of different proposals, some being much more conservative, much more maybe on the universal side.
Yep.
And then we'll maybe see some other proposals that have this tiered program. It's just about what's going to be able to get passed, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll probably see a variety of different things proposed, but at the end of the day, I think it'll probably be that more tiered approach that gets passed.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be small steps. I don't know if their
Yeah,
ultimate goal is, universal school choice. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But it seems like that would be the first step is something like tier, special needs, or failing schools, that sort of thing. So, you've mentioned a couple times now the net gain in Republicans, two in the House, one in the Senate. Is it aside from just school choice, right? That's the focus. That's everyone's focus, and that's fine. But overall, is it a more conservative Texas legislature? I mean, I guess two Republican votes is not a ton, right?
yeah.
But there's been some turnover, right? Is it an overall more conservative, or is it going to be still a little bit more moderate? Like, how do you think that's going to play out?
I think it comes down to the individual issues, right? When we see different things proposed, like here in Texas, they've already passed a lot of the big red meat sort of issues, like guns and abortion. Like that's not really on the table anymore. Maybe they're going to be introducing legislation to hit the edges of those issues, but really those big issues are out of the way. If we're talking about like more conservative, I think it might be more conservative as a reflection of how the electorate has moved. Even if we expand out, look at how Texas voted in the presidential election, it really went to the right. Variety of different demographics, voting Republican for the first time, moving to the Republican Party. And is that going to be reflected in the Texas Ledge? Are the members going to be voting the way their district voted in the presidential election, like how they voted for Ted Cruz overwhelmingly in the Senate? Like, it's possible it could be more conservative. We're seeing a lot more of the rabble rousers in the House gaining more attention
Sure.
and building up their profile. Are they going to have more say in the Texas House? It's possible, and if they pull maybe some more of those moderate members to their side, you could say it's a more conservative makeup of the Texas Ledge.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that depends, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but a lot of it depends on who the Speaker of the House will be. And I know that that's still in contention, if it's Dade Phelan or is Oliverson, is he still in the mix?
I think the front runner is David Cook right now.
David Cook. You say he's the front runner even ahead of Dade Phelan.
Well, it's all up in the air right now. That fight is going to be going on for a while. They actually have in December 7th, they have a GOP caucus meeting where they're going to be selecting an endorsed candidate. So that'll really give some insight before the vote goes to the floor. But yeah, no one really knows right now. Like there's lots of speculation, people throwing out whip votes, like speculating about that on Twitter and X, and we really don't know. There's David Cook and Phelan. Seems like those are the two right now.
Yeah. So, moving on to other sort of policy priorities, school choice seems like it's more likely, of course, and you mentioned Michaela, God, I keep forgetting her name. Plessa. Yes, sorry. I keep wanting to say Michaela, and I know that that's not correct, but that's what my mind goes to. She won her reelection, and her challenger was, very decentralized Bitcoin type person, and that's fine. But obviously ERCOT is always in the news every time that it's hot or cold or the wind blows a certain way. They've talked about how Bitcoin and crypto mining and data servers and everything like that are going to just suck up so much more energy. And on the national level, our representatives like Greg Casar are talking about, trying to connect the grid to the national grids.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm wondering if there's going to be any focus on shoring up the grid in Texas, or is that fight just sort of over?
No, I'm sure there's going to be a fight. There's always going to be a fight about
Yeah.
that, and so um, I think something to watch would be how much focus is put on nuclear energy and maybe that helping offset some of the stress that's been put on the electric grid. There's been a lot of discussion about these small modular nuclear reactors. Is there going to be allocations to helping build those throughout Texas
Yeah.
to help bolster the grid and help secure it? I think that's something that could be a big factor come this budget fight over securing the Texas grid.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, I don't know. It seems I'm not an energy expert by any stretch, but nuclear seems to be gaining a lot of steam lately over the past couple of years, more becoming more popular. People pointing out that it's very green and it's a lot more safe than it used to be. And those big disasters that you hear about are sort of they're outliers. It's very
Right.
reliable. Is there a big push for that? Is there a lot of lobbying effort happening? Do you think that it's being successful? Do you think that that's going to be something that actually happens? That I don't know. My understanding is that they're very expensive to build. Maybe the modular, smaller ones are cheaper. But still, Texans are suffering from, higher and higher energy prices. I'm wondering how that might shake out.
I'm not super familiar with the lobbying efforts
Sure.
regarding nuclear energy, but I think just people, just part of the electorate and the members themselves being more receptive to the idea of nuclear energy could bode well for it in this upcoming session. Um, I think it's an incredibly interesting piece of technology, something that's been underutilized for decades
Yeah.
because of this fear around these outlier events that have occurred in the past. But I think people are becoming much more receptive to them, and I think that'll really help usher in the possibility of something passing in the upcoming session.
Yeah. So the publicly funded lobbying, Brian Harrison, who I believe represents House District 10, tweeted recently, your tax dollars should never again be used to fund campaigns to raise your property taxes. I will file a bill next session to end that insanity. It sounds like he's talking about publicly funded lobbying, right? Um,
Yeah.
your tax dollars, your city, your county, or whatever, sending lobbyists up to Texas Ledge to, I don't know, lobby for more money and more of your tax dollars and trying to get your tax dollars using your tax dollars to get more tax dollars, and it's just a never-ending cycle. I know that's been a big issue for I think several sessions now, trying to end that. And it's something that conservatives have talked about for a long time. Do you think Brian Harrison will, or him or someone else, do you think that they'll be successful with something like that?
It's definitely possible. Uh, Especially, well, like anything's possible, right?
Sure.
But I think this new makeup of the House and the growing concern that's been expressed by other members regarding taxpayer-funded lobbying, if they can build a coalition to pass something like this and maybe bring some more hesitant members along with them, then of course it has an opportunity to pass. There's um, if if legislators are trying to eliminate lobbying, there's going to be a lot of lobbying money coming in on the other side, trying to force it not to pass. So it could become a big fight, of course. But it definitely has a possibility of passing. It could come down to a big fight on the floor. Who knows? But it will definitely be entertaining.
Do you think that the swing to the right, the being more conservative, do you think that Democrats will dig in their heels more, or will they find more opportunities to negotiate and more bipartisanship? I think that
Well,
may go into like the cultural, cultural issues come into play in Texas politics and stuff like that, which you write about. And there are cultural, the cultural wars are Democrats versus Republicans in so many different ways. And if you step to the other side, just toe that line, just they put your toe in the water just a little bit, you're sort of seen as, I don't know, a traitor or whatever the case may be.
Well, yeah, we saw Gilberto Hinojosa say he's going to step down as the leader of the Texas Democrats, the chair of
Yep.
the Texas Democrats. So, and that was because of comments he made regarding the trans issue.
Yep.
And that being such a huge issue, not just here in Texas, but nationally, which drove a lot of people who might have been independent, moderate voters, moved them to the right. Are we going to see that reflected in Texas House lawmakers or Texas Senate lawmakers? It's difficult to say because as we've seen over the past 6 days now, there's been a lot of postmortems on the Democrats losing by such a large amount in the presidential election. Democrats coming out and saying, "Oh, we need to actually run on a more progressive platform," or "We need to moderate our platform." There's these different strategies that people are proposing moving forward. Texas being such a conservative majority state, how its electorate is sort of made up. For a Democrat to be elected, their voter constituency is probably either going to be moderate or they're being elected in these deep blue counties that are much more to the left than the average Texas Republican or Texas voter. So it'll be interesting to see if the lawmakers moderate based upon how the Texas electorate has shifted to the right.
Yep.
On the culture war issues, there was big fights last session about the gender modification ban. There was the drag show ban that caught a lot of attention, but they ended up passing. Are we going to? It's possible we see more culture war issues, and I just don't know at this point what Democrats are going to do with how the electorate has shifted to the right post this this November 5th election. It's something I'm definitely keeping my eye on because it seems like there's a lot of internal fighting going on between Democrats right now about which way they should go. Should they go more progressive or should they moderate some of their views on the culture war issues? So it's definitely something to keep your eye on.
So I guess you mentioned Hinojosa stepped down from being the leader of the Texas Democrats. I'm not sure if there's any talk about who might replace him, but what do you think? I mean, do you have any insight into that, like how that might go, and how influential is that position in Texas?
Yeah, I'm not sure about who's going to run to replace him.
Sure.
But the influence that we saw Texas Democrats, they really thought this past election was going to be a time to reassert some dominance in Texas, and maybe gain some percentage points in these big elections. Like they really put a lot of effort behind the Colin Allred race, and that didn't really pan out for them. So will they maybe moderate some of their views and take a more middle line stance on some of these cultural war issues, or are they going to lean more into progressive cultural war issues? I think that's something they got to fix internally, before they put someone else new. But there was a lot of money put in to these races, and it just didn't really, at least on this national level, didn't really work out for them.
Yeah. So obviously Texas being a border state, and it seems like they're the front and center of the open borders and everything like that that's happening, the illegal immigration crisis that we've suffered under with Donald Trump winning the presidency. I think that there might be more funding for the border on a national level. And Texas famously, stepping up and putting a lot of their own money down toward the border, trying to secure it on their own and facing legal challenges to that and everything like that. Do you think that is Texas going to keep that up and, try to supplement any sort of efforts that the federal government might do under the Trump presidency? Do they pull back and say, all right, Trump's got it, let's put this money towards something else? How do you see that fight playing out?
So they had put aside and allocated, I think it was either like 4 or 6 billion to bolstering border security.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, now that Trump's in office and there's going to be an increased amount of attention by the federal government on border security and quelling the issues of illegal immigration, what is Texas going to do now with those multi-billions of dollars? It's possible they keep it as part of upcoming legislation to allocate to increase border security, or they could hash it out during the budget discussion and allocate those billions to other issues, whether it be infrastructure or Texas energy grid. That could definitely happen as well. I think an interesting aspect to watch during the upcoming session is how are Donald Trump's, he's promised mass deportations, right? How is that coordination going to work with Texas? Is it going to be done in coordination with Governor Greg Abbott? Is it going to be done in coordination with legislation that's passed in the Tex Ledge? That'll be interesting to see. Is it going to be mobilizing local law enforcement, state law enforcement? Is that going to be done through policy, or is that going to be done from some sort of mandate? I'm not sure, but it's something that's going to be interesting to watch.
Do you think it'll happen?
What's going to happen? The mass deportation?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what I understand what you're saying. You know, how is it? The question remains: how would it work? How would it work? Is it going to work in conjunction with, you know, I don't know, Texas DPS or whatever the case may be, local law enforcement? I don't know, but you know, the talk is as if it's going to happen, and there's a lot of talk that it is going to happen, and I'm curious what you think.
Well, so I've listened to JD Vance talk about this issue a few different times, and he's made the analogy to like eating a hamburger.
Okay.
So when you eat a hamburger, you don't shove the whole thing in your mouth. You take a bite, you put it down, take a bite, you put it down. And so that's how he sort of used that analogy for how they were going to conduct the deportation efforts. Like, take the first bite. What is the group? They'll focus on the people who have committed crimes already here in the States. And that's a really easy thing. These people have already been arrested. They can already identify where they are. And so slowly, you know, taking chunks out of the millions of people that have come into the country illegally. Yeah. Just doing it through a slow process, not just all at once, right? That's not feasible. But also I've heard the talks about, like I mentioned, the coordination with state and local police. If that's a possibility, I think we'll see proposals put out by the Trump administration on how those efforts are going to be conducted. Yeah. But at least here in Texas, I think that'll be interesting to see how involved Abbott is in this process. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your doctoral studies with postmodern philosophical influences on education. Right, and that might be a mouthful for some of those out there. I think I understand what it is. I understand. I have an idea of what postmodernism is, and you know how it might influence education. But you know, we do talk about school choice, and we did talk about school choice and culture war issues. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but a lot of the school choice advocates are advocates because of postmodern philosophical influences in education.
Yeah, well, this.
Maybe unknowingly, maybe they don't know that's why, but that if they read maybe that's sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work, right? And how he's focused on cell phones and those sorts of issues.
But are cell phones going to be allowed in schools, Cameron?
Well, I know you guys did the podcast with Troxclair, right?
Yeah, on a different podcast, yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, that could be brought up. That's going to be something that's brought up. But he wrote another book called The Righteous Mind. Yeah. And that was a really formative book, at least for me, with how I view politics and when I was kind of coming into understanding politics more generally, how different people view issues. And so understanding these underlying moral foundations and how people are viewing different issues is just a sort of post hoc rationalization. And so the way I got into understanding postmodernism was through trying to understand these different moral foundations. And so when back, 2018, 2019, 2020, really the height of what we call wokeness,
Yeah.
was when we saw critical race theory, gender theories really working their, really coming to prominence in the cultural zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
And so what I am attempting to understand is why do we see educators more open to these more progressive ideas? And my assumption going into my research that I'm continuing to conduct is why are teachers through the K through 12 education system, why do they lean more to the left liberal side of things and much more open to these deconstructivist, relativist ideas regarding how students should understand the world?
Yeah.
Whereas people on the right, we've seen a much more focus on a Western tradition, Western canon, as the sanctity of the Western tradition, teaching that in classrooms. So understanding that contrast between worldviews and why people on the more liberal end of the moral spectrum are attracted to education. That's sort of where I focused my research.
Yeah. So you read a lot of Foucault and Paulo Freire?
I have read them. Postmodernism, like the post-structuralists, like I think that those things are really interesting. I think they can explain a lot about the current situation that we're in.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to parse, like, what is your underlying moral beliefs about things? I'm much more of a structuralist than a deconstructionist. So I don't see their prescriptions for certain outcomes as being the right moves. So, but it's very interesting to read those things and see how they've been applied, not just in the education system, but through entertainment, media, corporations, governments. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, so even in deep red Texas, the education system you're saying is influenced by those sort of postmodern thinkers, those very left progressive thinkers. And I mean, does it start with the education that educators get at the university level?
Yeah. So, you look at the university systems, and these are the ideas that are being taught. And so as young people are being introduced and enveloped in these liberal progressive ideas, they then go into the world and work in government and media and education systems, and they bring those ideas along with them.
Yeah.
And so it starts with the universities and then sort of trickles down to everything else. At least that's been my viewpoint on it.
Sure. Yeah. I think that could be true for sure. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Cameron. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm sure that we could talk about postmodern philosophical influences in education for a lot longer. But that might take, I don't know, maybe that's a Joe Rogan style or a 3-hour conversation.
Right.
But I appreciate you taking the time. So you're a reporter for the Texan. Do you want to give out website and social media, not only for you, but also the Texan?
Yeah, you can go to the Texan.news, and we post articles daily about all things Texas politics. We put out podcasts, interviews. We do a daily roundup. We do a weekly roundup podcast. And then we also have an entire slate of newsletters. I have a newsletter that goes out every, I believe it's on Tuesday now. Yeah. Or no, Wednesday. It goes out Wednesday, and then Brad Johnson, #1 reporter in Texas, Brad Johnson. He has his newsletter, Fourth Reading, a must read for people who want the insider info on Texas politics. Fourth Reading that goes live on Tuesday. So we got a whole lot of content for people who want to know what's going on in the state.
Yeah. And your personal social medias, you want to throw those out there?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Cameron S. Abrams.
All right.
Very
Cool.
easy.
Well, we'll put the links down for those down in the description below. Cameron, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad.